Good morning. The Committee on Environment, Revenue and Taxation, Labor Procurement, Statistics, Research and Planning is calling this informational hearing to order. The time is now 9:37 a.m., Friday, June 18th, 2021. Notice of this morning's informational hearing was provided to senators, stakeholders, and local media on June 11th, 2021 for the 5-day notice and June 16th for the 48-hour notice, thus meeting the requirements of open government law. I would like to acknowledge my colleagues that are here today, Senator Joanne Brown, Senator Tony Atta, and I believe Senator Jim Moylan is on his way. The purpose of this informational hearing is to review the General Service Agency annual report in compliance with 5 GCA Section 5248 relative to all contracts made under Section 5214 Sole Source Procurement and Sections 5215 Emergency Procurement for the calendar year 2020 from January to December. The rules of conduct for this virtual public hearing, informational hearing, is as follows. The host of this hearing will mute all participants until called upon by the chair. Virtual background should not be utilized during these hearings, and participants' face must be visible at all times. When called to speak, please ensure that you're unmuted and that you're speaking into the microphone. Members of the committee wishing to speak may indicate their desire to do so through the in-app chat feature. The order of questioning begins with the chairperson, followed by senators. Individuals testifying shall first be recognized by the chair before speaking and shall state their name for record-keeping purposes. Questions and testimony shall be confined to the substance or nature of the agenda. Personal inference as to character or motive of any senator or individual testifying is not permitted. Any violations of this general rule of conduct will result in the removal from the public hearing by the host. So at this time, I would like to welcome Chief Procurement Officer Claudia Faggi. Thank you so much for being here today. And I believe Attorney Kono, thank you so much for your time. And any of the support staff at General Service Agency. Again, I thank you for your time in participating in this hearing. Again, the purpose of today's hearing is to review the report that was submitted to the legislature in compliance with 5 GCA 5248, which is the reporting of all sole source and emergency procurements. So if we can begin, I would like to share a presentation, a very short presentation that summarizes the report. Okay, so we analyzed the information. This is one of the things that we looked at was we wanted to look at the agencies that participated in emergency and sole source. And so what you see in this graph in orange are the emergency procurements, and this is just the number of procurements, not the total amounts in orange. And the blue represents the number of sole source procurements. And so as you can see here, the different agencies, so not all agencies are represented. And as to be expected, Department of Public Health had the most emergency procurements during this pandemic. And then the sole source, they also had the most sole source procurements. And in a couple slides, I would show the breakdown of what the sole source was used for. But this is just to give you an idea of the number of procurements. So you have, I believe, the lowest one here. If I can go back to my records, I think it was 1, and I think it goes all the way to 278. So we have, the Office of the Governor has 273 procurements, emergency procurements, and then Department of Public Health has 266. So these are the two entities that had the largest amount of emergency procurements. In regards to sole source, the most was Department of Public Health, followed by, it looks like Guam Behavioral Health had the most sole source procurements in the government, in the line agencies, that is. Okay, so we can take, there is this slide or this presentation is also shared by those that are here today and the participants. I believe it's in the Google Drive, if you want to take a closer look and download to your computer. Okay, next slide. Okay, so this slide basically shows the numbers. And so what you see here, this is for Sole Source. It shows the number of procurements. Again, that this is the information that was used to develop that previous graph that you saw on the previous slide. And so you see here the number of procurements for each of the agencies for Sole Source, the total PO amount, and then on the next column is the amount that has been paid. So all of the agencies, the amount paid was below the PO amount. There is one Department of Administration that shows there was more that was paid than what the PO amount had. And so again, this is in the Google Drives if you want to take a closer look at that. So you have different agencies here listed, and not all agencies use Sole Source. And it just shows the extent to which they used as far as the amount. So dollar amounts, it looks like the DRT has the greatest amount of Sole Source at 4 million. This is what the PO amount was. This is what they were authorized to use. It's 4 million, about 4.4 million. At the time this report came out, 1.9 million was used of that. And then followed by, looks like Guam Police Department at 2.6 million. They used at the time this report was given, they used almost 1.9 million. The third highest of Sole Source was Department of Public Health at 2.2 million, and they used roughly 1.8 million at the time. So I just want to also maybe give some context, because in this year of 2020, the total amount of procurement that was done or requisitions processed were 64 million. So I believe in another slide, we did add up the total amount. I believe with Sole Source, it was about 7.9 million was used for, of all the procurement, 7.9 million was attributed to Sole Source out of the 64.1 million that was expended by the government of Guam through the line agencies. Okay, so next slide. Okay, this is a listing of the emergency procurements by agencies. And so again, you'll see on the first column is the agency itself. The next column is the number of emergency procurements by these agencies, the total PO amount authorized per agency, the total amount used on the next column, and then in the last column, it shows where the amount paid exceeded the PO amounts. Okay, so it looks like the greatest amount authorized was for, again, Department of Public Health, and understandably so during the public health emergency. So we'll go into more details how these procurements broke down. So Department of Public Health, we see 3.5 million was authorized. Of that, 2.4 million was utilized. The next highest, the highest amount was the Office of the Governor at almost 6.5 million. The amount paid was close to 14.8 million. The next highest we see is, I'm trying to go over it. It looks like the Department of Public Health at 3.5 million. The amount paid was 2.4 million of that. And then the third highest looks to be Department of Labor. I think, yeah, it looks like Department of Labor is the third highest at 1.3 or 1.4 million, close to 1.4 million authorized. Of that, 1.1, close to 1.2 million was used. And again, you have the PowerPoints to look at to just kind of take in the information a little bit more. So yeah, there were a couple agencies that exceeded their PO amount, and those are listed in green. Okay, so we have, yeah, the green. Okay, so we can go ahead and move to the next slide. Okay, so this is the breakdown. I wanted to see what were we using Sole Source for, and the hypothesis that I had that we were using it for IT. And so what this pie chart shows that it was confirmed, my hypothesis was confirmed, but it's not as great as what I expected. So at IT, we have roughly about, again, 7.5, I think it was here, it says 7.1 million here. Of the 7 million, about 43% was IT related. Telecommunications, 18% of the sole source was telecommunications. And then leases and renovations at 17, almost 18% of the sole source. And then there was one entry, the Laddie Treatment Center was 6%. Then we had training. So I looked through the listing. I tried to compile all the trainings. It was 2.6% of sole source. And there was a, regarding relocation cost and warranty. So what this entry is, it basically is like, for instance, copy machines that had to be relocated. It was important for the vendor to move them and relocate them. Otherwise, all warranties would not apply anymore. So that was one of the uses for sole source. The other thing was Department of Public Health, when they had to relocate some of the office materials, they also were under warranty, and the warranty would be voided if the company did not move it themselves. So that's the 1.7%. Subscriptions, subscriptions include newspapers, legal online subscriptions such as law, use of legal, online subscriptions. That was at 0.7%, and then other at 10.7%. So the other includes very specialized equipment. It includes, it also included ink cartridges that had to be used for a specific instrument. There were other reasons such as compressed air, things that can only be found by one vendor on island. It was just a whole kind of a multitude of reasons for the other part. So this is the breakdown for sole source. Next slide. And then finally, this is the emergency procurements by category. So these are basically, just to give a kind of qualifier, these numbers have to be reconfirmed, but this is generally, as you can see, when you look at the emergency procurements, it's really it's kind of like a documentation of what happened during the pandemic, looking at what we used the money for. And by and large, most of the procurements were COVID related. Again, we had the DOC food vendor. That was one that was before the pandemic. But most of the emergency procurements were for pandemic purposes. And so these are some of the listings. We have PPEs, took up 11%, testing, contact tracing, according to this listing, quarantine isolation centers, 24%, non-congregate shelters, 14%, congregate shelters, 4%. And then there was hardware. So they had to create, build up certain areas. It should be not zero, but it's a percentage, a 0.%. Lodging for medical staff, 3%, case management, 1%, surveillance, 15%, cleaning services, 3%, vehicles. So vehicles is basically the purchase of vehicles themselves. That include the buses. There were some SUVs that were purchased. This does not include any kind of service that was needed for vehicles. It's just the purchase of the vehicle themselves. So that's 7%. Food, 2%, and other, 16%. So this other, I didn't break it down further, but a lot of it was actually technology, whether it was computers, IT support. There was also, I believe, telecommunications. It also included supplies, Post-its and that sort of thing. So it's really a combination of many things. So this is the breakdown for the emergency procurements. Okay, all right, thank you. Okay, so if we can just have great. All right, thanks. All right, so So prior to this information hearing, we had requested documentation from the Chief Procurement Officer, Claudia, and she provided all the documentation for Sole Source. And I believe that was over 300 documents. There were, of the emergency procurement, there was over 800 documents, and we did request that information. We understand that there's, as far as determination, we're still expecting that. So in looking over, so if I could just say, looking over the Sole Source, I believe we have it in the drive as well. We have the listing of the vendors. So if for those that have access to this, it has basically a summary sheet, a more expanded summary sheet than was provided to the legislature. So if you take a look at it, you can see the vendors and justifications. You can see descriptions of what it was used for. You can see the PO amounts and the amounts paid for those POs. And again, I showed you kind of like the summary using those graphs to show you what it was used. And so in the documents that were provided, so the justifications in the procurement record that was provided to our office, it includes an inter-office memo that describes the justification for these sole source procurements. And then there is an attachment, I guess, supporting documents that are attached to the inter-office memo. And so if I can just maybe pull up one of the documents, and it shows, so basically I want to go into the different justifications that are on the inter-office memo. Okay, so some of the, and I can have maybe the Chief Procurement Officer to kind of explain what each category is about. But by and large, a lot of, like I showed earlier, a lot of them are IT related. But if I would like maybe the Chief Procurement Officer to speak more about what these different categories are, and provide some more clarification on certain things that we saw on the record. So, okay, so good morning, Chief Claudia. If you can turn on your sound and, okay, great. All right, thank you for your time this morning.
All right, good morning. Good morning, Senators. So did Senator Oversight Chair, did you want me to explain the inter-office memo, or what did you want me to explain?
Yeah, so can you go through the different categories and just explain what each category is about? So maybe I could just prompt you a little bit. So there's something direct to publisher. So if you can explain what that is or what that means.
Okay, so I'll go down the line and I'll just explain each line item under the sole source. So this inter-office memo actually is listed in the statute and in the regulations, the procurement rules and regulations. Under emergency, it will list down this, like only source available or only distributor. And what that means is, for example, an equipment wherein only a particular vendor or the manufacturer can provide the services or parts to that certain equipment. Okay, like there's no other vendor that can provide that service to either repair, conduct maintenance services on such equipment, or again, proprietary. Okay. So that's what that actually means. And then the next one is award based on compatibility of equipment, accessories, or replacement parts. Again, goes in line with the only vendor available or only source available to provide that type of service. So in that one there where it says items for compatibility, this is where we require the departments to provide the justification to GSA before I actually approve such method based on their requests. Okay, and the justification is, again, they have an existing equipment. Like you mentioned earlier in your opening statement, it's where, again, for example, the E911 system, the SmartNet system, and a lot of IT equipments. That's what we use. It's for compatibility. Okay. The other one is equipment items, equipment or materials are standard and uniform to the government. Again, this one here is rarely used, but again, it's like, for example, the fire apparatuses. So each station, because of the interoperability of the parts that they may need to support each other's mission. What happens with this one here is where the department comes up with a standardization program. And this is when we exercise this method or use that as their justification as to why they want to go on a sole source. But this, this is not common. It's not common at all on the standardization.
Can you give an example? Do you remember an example in the past that used this particular justification? Is there something that comes to mind?
Actually, way back, maybe in 2004, I believe it was for the fire department. Again, the fire apparatuses. I think it was a fire trucks. When fire came up with a letter of standardization, again, to support the mission of the fire, where the parts can be interoperable. That's when we use that. And if you recall, we also utilized this on the siren alert. And the reason we used that on the siren alert justification of the sole source, if you recall, that also went on an appeal. In fact, that was the first appeal that was forwarded to the OPA's office, wherein GSA lost that case. However, we sat down with the grantor, the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, to show the record. We just showed the record that, again, with the letters that we received by the president, it was a presidential directive that whether the federal or the government, whoever had that equipment up and running already, that whichever government should be interoperable with that particular existing equipment. So we use that to standardize that based on the presidential directive, based on the justifications that are provided. Okay, so those are the only two cases that we actually use that standardization. That's why I stated it's not commonly used.
Okay, and so basically it would require like an executive order like that, or how would, because it looks like that this could be questioned, right? Because there was you said GSA didn't win that case. So I mean, moving forward, is this something? So again, it's not really used, but yeah. So what would make this justification then? This particular item?
We don't put too much emphasis on it because again, we want to be able to be competitive. Okay. And so we don't really accommodate this standardization within the department unless the justification is really merited. For example, the fire, but even with procuring the fire trucks, again, if it's outdated and there's new fire trucks that have been made, updated equipments. So we kind of do away with that because again, they don't have the money to provide the fleet of fire trucks for every station, for example. So that kind of goes away, because again, there's no more standardization. Yeah.
Right. Sorry if I can interject, if you don't mind. So perhaps I know we were talking about state bids, the idea of state bids and IDIQs. Could that be used in place of this justification? Because if we're talking about standardization, like we want something used throughout a department, maybe we can take out this. Do you think it's worthwhile just to take out this justification and focus on consolidated plan procurement if we're looking at standardization? Or how does one agency move forward to if they want to standardize equipment? In your position, what would your recommendation be?
Well, actually, it's very difficult because a lot of the agencies don't have a standardization program. Okay. So that's what I'm saying. It's rarely used. Okay. Very rare. Yeah, like I said, maybe since I've been the chief, there's only 2 instances. Okay. And that's over 15 years. Yeah.
Okay. yeah, we could talk more about this, but I'm thinking perhaps one way to address this is not through sole source, but through a typical, the traditional IFBs. But yeah, you're right. The agencies need to come up with a standardization plan. And
Yes.
I think that's one thing we've been discussing too, is about planned procurement, right? And
Correct.
that's one way to hopefully, to promote something like that. Okay, sorry. Continue with the next item.
Okay, so the next one is item is needed for trial use or testing. So what normally the justification for this more than likely is, for example, forensics wants to use this certain type of equipment, and let's say it's tested throughout the nation, and we just want to see if it works for our environment or for our island. We allow them to use it, but let's say that throughout the trial testing, they discovered that it will benefit the agency. We will not continue to procure for a set of equipments. We will then put out a competitive bid for that particular equipment. We will not continue the sole source. We're just going to use it to test the equipment. And then if it suits the need of the department, then we will put out a formal bid, not through a sole source.
And so these trial use, is that normally through unsolicited bid process? Is that, or how does one even begin to initiate a trial use of something?
Okay, so again, with this trial and testing, it has more, again, it's, we've done this maybe only once, and that was for, I believe it was GPD on some forensic equipment that was being used by another state, and they wanted to see if it'll work for Guam before we even procure, a lot of those certain type of equipment. So again, it's mainly for like the Department of Public Safety or fire department, those kind of departments, not just a department that just wants to use this because they want to just test it. There's got to be a real justification as to why they want to test this type of equipment.
And is there an opportunity, because perhaps that might I could see the potential for this particular justification to kind of, maybe, I don't want to say, I'm going to try to use the right words, but is there efforts to look at the market to see if there are other vendors out there besides the one that the agency selects for trial testing?
Senator, I wasn't done yet. I wasn't done explaining yet. So before I actually accommodate the request to use such sole source for trial and testing, we will put out a request for interest. The department is interested in acquiring such equipment, such type of testing equipment or forensic equipment, and we're looking at doing a trial and testing. Would you, please submit your interest if you can provide such type of equipment? So we don't just take it and go with it. We still put out a request for interest.
Okay,
and
great.
If no one comes in, then of course, and if someone comes in, then it's not bad to test all three. For example, there's 3 that showed interest. Maybe one might be better than one that they are aware of. So that's how we would accommodate and move forward with that sole source to justify the file. Yes.
All right. All right. So, okay.
And then the other one is items to be procured for resale. For resale, that one there, I don't recall using that at all. For the resale on a sole source. So the other one is public utility services. Again, that's like our water or this public utility services is actually like when we're procuring, it's either or. We either use the government to government statute or the which is subsection 5004 or the sole source. But in this case, we normally use the government to government. It's very rare we use this sole source for public utilities.
Okay. All right. So going back to the previous item, so you don't recall using it, but so can you explain what that's about? I mean, do you know an example, or, I mean, you said you don't use it, but why is, I mean, maybe,
I really don't. We've never used that because what do we have to resell? We don't. You know, if we're going to sell anything, it's going to go to the surplus bid and not the sole source.
okay.
Yeah. Okay.
You,
If the government was to sell or auction anything, it would be through the sole source.
so do you think it's good to take this out? Like,
I don't see why not.
just as far as updating the forms?
Right.
Have you,
And the last one is the supplies are offered through bankruptcy or receivership sales or other disposition at lower than prevailing market prices. This one here is, for example, if you recall, there was an airline. I forgot, it was a very small company wherein you know, they filed bankruptcy, and it was some kind of a commuter plane from here to Saipan, like Freedom Air, I believe. I'm not sure if that's the name. But let's say they sold a lot of airline equipments, you know, for in that sense, under they went through this bankruptcy program. So that's where the government can take advantage of this sole source procurement to procure such equipments that are needed by the government agencies. If it's through a bankruptcy program, you know, if the vendor files through bankruptcy. So the airport did take advantage of that when they did procure some equipments from that particular company. I forgot if it was Freedom Air. I'm not really sure of the name of the company at the time. It was years ago.
yeah.
That's where we will use that.
Yeah, I mean, I could see the importance of getting a good deal, but yeah, I'm just wondering if the procurement law, you know, basically the procurement for sole source says that there is no other vendor out there that can provide this um, type of service or supply. So this one, yeah, I'm wondering if that follows procurement law. I'm not. Yeah, it doesn't seem like it follows the sole source, but maybe we could discuss this a little bit further. Okay.
Yeah, on that one.
Yeah. So, I mean, how do you, I guess, you know, when you look at the statute, how does this fit? And because the idea of the sole source under statute says that there's no other vendor that can provide it. But when in this particular instance, um, I guess, how do you, yeah, there seems to be a discrepancy with this last justification when you look at the law versus this. How do you, or do you see that as being, do you see a discrepancy here with the procurement, what's in statute?
Um, you can look at it that way, you know, because you're looking at the only source available, but it does give this condition, you know, that it can apply if these are happening. And again, maybe because at the time they're the only ones, let's say, going through this bankruptcy program, something to that effect.
It doesn't quite fit the statute. Yeah, if
But
there are
again,
other,
we've used it only once that I've been actually the chief procurement officer.
yeah, I mean, I guess if it was not sole source, how would you handle something like a sale? You know, like, you know, that's the thing with government, right? Government has their own rules, right, and procedures. But as a government agency, how would this be handled otherwise? If it's not through sole source, how would this be handled? If there's a
Um,
bankruptcy and there's a lot of equipment that's on a really below market price, how would this be otherwise handled, you think?
we would have to give it some thought process. You know,
Okay,
here it's going to take a long time for us to come up with a plan, but we can sidebar on this if you want to get into more detail and
okay,
how to discuss
yeah,
it, you know, to, you know, amend the law or the regulations.
okay, okay. Yeah, thank you. We'll look into that further. Um, all right, so yeah, thank you for that, the overview. Okay, so the next thing on the questions that I have is the written determination. So we went over sole source, the justifications. We wanted to see, yeah, for the so the emergency procurement law was updated, as you know. It went into effect January of this year. So moving forward, all emergency procurements require a written determination. Um, we haven't received the documents regarding the written determinations or we haven't seen the procurement record yet. We're still waiting the procurement record for the emergency procurements that of the listing that you gave us.
Yes.
So, and looking at what it was used for, I mean, it seems, yeah, it was used for the purposes of the pandemic. You know, I think most in the previous graphs that I showed, we highlighted, we did a breakdown of what it was used for, and it was used for the pandemic. So, as far as written determinations, again, the law didn't come into effect till this year. So moving forward, have you released any circulars to let these agencies know? So that there were all the agencies that are using emergency procurement. Did you release any kind of press release or circular to let the agencies know that they need to have a public hearing if they want to continue with emergency procurements? So before the 90 days are up, they would each agency that has emergency procurements, they either have to switch over to the traditional procurement. If they want to continue with the emergency, they need to have a public hearing. So I just, have you sent out any circulars regarding that?
Senator, but we will work on that to
Okay.
make sure the departments are aware of that.
Yeah, because I know they already have the vendors here, so it's a matter of maybe creating the bid, putting together the bid package.
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
And in fact, as I shared with you, I'm actually preparing, to gather information. I've already started gathering information so that we can put out an IDIQ bid, a formal solicitation on all these PPEs. Because again, we don't know when this pandemic's going to end, but we do know that it's continuing. So, the OPA mentioned, we're trying to get away from this emergency and go through the competitive process. So right now we're doing some analytical work. It has begun. For the most part, we finished, some of the 2020 fiscal year. Is it the 2020? Yeah, 2020 fiscal year procurement on the PPEs. So I'm trying to gather information so that we have a good number to begin with our quantities. We don't want to again overstock or over procure on these items. So we're just trying to do some analytical work to have a baseball figure of the quantities that we may have as a requirement on the bid.
Okay. And then in the emergency procurement listing, there's something I saw, the blanket purchase agreement within emergency procurement. So how do you distinguish those two processes? Blanket purchase agreements, from emergency procurements.
So the authority code utilized was under the emergency procurement, but I think you're reading the text where it says blanket purchase agreement. So
Yes.
what that is they're just following the format of the blanket because it's on as needed. For example, the hardware supplies that you see there, I saw that was listed on your report, on your sheet. So what we normally do is we put out the same language as a BPA, as a blanket purchase agreement language. But the authority code, if you notice on the purchase order, is the emergency procurement, which is the 3113. And that's why it shows up on the report under emergency.
Okay. So, but do you see, so you basically, so if I'm hearing correctly, you're saying that the agencies are following the procedures for a blanket blanket purchase agreements, but then you're processing it as an emergency procurement?
Yes. On and as needed. For example, lumber, hardware.
Okay. Is there a difference though, as far as emergency, as far as getting a better price, if you're doing just an emergency procurement separate from a BPA. Is there any difference between the two as far as price?
The difference is with the method of a blanket purchase agreement, we have to issue it out to at least 3 vendors of equal value if we're going to use the method of the blanket purchase agreement. Okay, and in this case, we're using the emergency. But we still, even if you look at those that says blanket purchase agreements, you will find out that there's three companies that we actually has that. And that's what I'm saying. We're utilizing under the emergency method the same process as a blanket, where you still go out. We still give it to 3, and the statute under the emergency is we have to solicit to at least 3. We're still following that.
Okay. So I guess the emergency procurement allows for not necessarily going with the lowest price, because you're allowing for I guess you can pay more because the vendor can bring it to you quicker.
Yes.
Right. Okay.
Correct.
Okay. All right. Thank you for that clarification. And I guess during the pandemic, that was essential to get these supplies as quickly as possible. And I know, that was, we lived through a hard time. There was not enough PPEs, even for the civilian, the rest of the population. There was not enough PPEs for the medical community, not enough gowns. So yeah, it was definitely a trying time.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so okay, I guess I want to go back to the sole source. In some of the procurement documents that we received, there was, or at least I think it shows up in the listing, the reason for the justification was that, or let's see, there was something said that there was an error in method selection. I think there was maybe 2 cases of that in the sole source. And I believe one of them was for the Laddie Treatment Center. And in it,
I was going to point that out. Yeah, the Laddie. I saw the Laddie on your list. So yes. The Laddie actually was procured by behavioral health through a request for proposal process. So the authority code should have been 3121, and that's why we issued out an amendment, because we discovered that they utilized, the buyer indicated the 3112 instead of the 3121. So just a typical error. And that's why we amended it to read the 3121, which means it's continuing services.
Okay, so, but then it falls under sole source. So if an agency is doing an RFP, but then GSA handles it as a sole source, how does that work?
No. That's why although it was listed under the Sole Source Procurement,
okay.
We issued an amendment to correct that authority code. It shouldn't have been. It was not procured via sole source. It's just the authority code used was 3112 instead of a 3121, which 3121 is a continuing services.
Okay, so but in the document, the director asked for an emergency procurement. That if I read
which
it.
I did not authorize. I did not authorize it.
Okay, so basically you switch it to an RFP, but it's showing up in the sole source.
Be an RFP.
Okay. Yeah, it's just showing up in the sole source then. Should it not be in the sole source listing?
But just so you know, Senator, it's not always when the department submits a request for emergency procurement that I, as the chief procurement officer, approves it. Because I'll give you an example. Various agencies, they have what you call the preventive maintenance program for their AC units, for example, or their elevators. And then all of a sudden their 5-ton unit goes down, right? So then when they submit this request, and it has happened in the past, my question to them is, I don't just go ahead and submit a declaration of emergency and forward to the governor to sign this, request by the department. I go back and I ask the department, so what happened to your maintenance program? You have maintenance program for your equipment in place. Do you communicate with your vendor? Does your vendor provide you these reports saying your equipment is, it's nearing its lifespan and it's gonna go down on you. You need to start planning to procure another 5-ton unit because it's reached its capacity. So, you know, what kind, do you just get these invoices from your provider and pay them? So who's in charge to make sure that these preventive maintenance contractors are providing you with adequate information about your equipment that they're taking care of for you?
Yeah.
So it's not always the case that I approve whatever the department submits to me for emergency. I screen and I review it. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that's yeah, your job, right? And thank you for that.
Yes.
The other thing, so maybe perhaps, I'm always looking for ways to improve the system, right?
Mm.
And so, perhaps one way that if we're talking about maintenance, um, you know, to what extent is that included in the specifications? If an agency is looking to procure goods, right? For instance, like air conditioners, vehicles, um, is there a practice that, you maybe a recommendation to these agencies to look and see what the cost for maintenance would be, or the warranties, or, is that all part of the package? Because one of the things that we want to avoid is, you purchase expensive equipment, you don't include the maintenance, and then of course the maintenance kills you, right? So, are those recommendations within these for the first of all, are these agencies given the recommendation to include maintenance within the purchase of a good?
We do. For example, you know, like fire apparatuses, we include maintenance programs. We also include extended warranties on certain type of equipments.
Thanks. Yeah, because that would help avoid sole sourcing. That's one of the ways we can avoid sole source if it's already part of the original.
I agree. Yes.
Okay. Yeah, just trying to find ways, because sole source emergency, they tend to cost more, right? If we can try to minimize it. And, I just want to also, I gave the context that, as far as the amount of procurements that were done, it's about 64 million, according to the budget that was submitted to the legislature. 64 million was spent, and of that, about 7.9 million was sole source. But I think if there's ways that we can always continually improve the process, that would be good.
Mhm.
Um, okay, so the other thing is, yeah, so, we want, how often are line agencies, are there regular trainings for line agencies when it comes to like any changes in the logs or changes in procedures? How often are the agencies kept up to date with the procurement practices?
So, for example, when the 5150, the review by the Attorney General's office was enacted, we immediately conducted a training, and we listed all these required documents, like, you know, determinations or declarations, whether it's 500,000 or more. So we don't just send out circulars, we also back it up with a training. We also conduct training for the departments, the line agencies and departments, once there's a new statute for that, you know, and for that instance of the magnitude of that 5150. Again, you know, we actually now require the departments to submit a declaration that they are forwarding to GSA the entire procurement record, that even if it's less than 500,000. And the reason for that is I was facing a lawsuit under the taxpayer lawsuit because of information that was going back and forth between the department and the vendor. And I was the one sued under a taxpayer lawsuit for that situation when I had no information on it. I had no information that the department was communicating with the vendor. The only time I found out was through a deposition when I was deposed. So, but again, it didn't move that lawsuit. It didn't take the lawsuit away from me. I still had to endure that. But so when that happened, I said, okay, I'm going to make sure that these departments under that declaration form that they are forwarding to GSA the entire procurement record, whatever communication log that transpired between the department and whichever vendor or market research they've done, that they are forwarding that with the declaration form. Okay, so that again, you know, we're just being fair to each other, that I'm not going to get caught by surprise again because there's some communications going on between the department and the vendor, and then I'm the one facing the lawsuit. So we do educate them. We do provide those trainings. Again, last year because of the pandemic, but the end part of 2019, we did provide training. So, and then continuous training in 2019 because we were also providing this training on the on-base, the on-base system that we acquired. Because again, there's still a lot of training that needs to take place, especially, the departments that have new employees or they assign the procurement to another individual. And then that individual continues to call back and forth, back and forth. So it's best to just provide them, a full-blown training about the system instead of this piecemeal.
Right. No, yeah, I agree. And that's one thing that we requested was the SOPs.
Yes,
So yeah,
coming to you.
I appreciate that. Yeah, we want to take a look and see maybe there's areas that we can help with in improving
Okay.
the whole process. So yeah, I think I'm glad you brought that up because the procurement record is something that's so important, right? So we want to make sure the agencies, because they're given the authority to for small purchases, correct?
Yes, less than 10,000.
Less than 10,000. Okay, so we want to make sure that the procurement record is complete when they're looking, doing the quotes, right? When they're doing the RFQs for any kind of small purchases.
Yes.
So yeah, from what I'm I haven't looked at the emergency procurement yet, but in looking at the sole source, yeah, it doesn't show. I don't know if you gave me the complete record, but it doesn't show the initial communications by the line agencies. That the procurement the record should cover everything, right? From the communications, the bid proposal, that sort of thing. So is that all included in the procurement record for the sole source and emergency? Do you have all of that information from the agencies? Do they provide you with like the communications, the request for quotes, that sort of thing?
Yes, they do.
Okay, because we're waiting on that for the emergency, so we would like to maybe take a look at that to make sure that it's being, properly followed.
We're currently working on your request, Senator, on the emergency, on the documentation, the justifications for the emergency.
Okay, thank you. And as far as last year, is there an interoffice memo for emergency procurements?
There's a justification. Yeah.
Oh, justification. Okay.
Yes.
But
Yes.
it's
That's
different.
a part of the providing. We're preparing for you.
Okay. All right. Thanks. The other thing is, yeah. So have you been able to review, or I mean, obviously you're very strapped with manpower, but I think it's really important to, compliance, right? I think this is something you'd mentioned before, having a compliance officer to kind of oversee what's happening with the line agencies. But of course, education is so important too. They have to be trained, and that's why we need to fix that. So have you looked at specific agencies to see if they are getting the RFQs? Ensuring that that process is being followed.
Oh, yes, because again, I still review, although I delegated for them to conduct the procurement. In other words, get the 3 quotes, prepare the purchase orders, but everything still filters for my approval to ensure that the record is complete before I execute the purchase order.
Maybe that's another info here, but how about the have you looked at the Guam Public Library to see if they're following the RFQ procedures?
Well, with public library, we've asked the ASO, Ms. Sandra, to actually come down to GSA so we can actually show her, again, kind of like give her a one-to-one training But we've shared, not just this year. We've asked her to come down. She's been here to train her because they think everything is sole source, and it just keeps going back and forth. And I feel really bad not being able to accommodate the needs of the library because I can't get these purchase orders through because of the lack of understanding. But so I asked her to come here. We share with her the steps, and we haven't heard back from her as of that time, you know. So it's kind of difficult when it's hard to grasp the process, you know.
Okay, so, but then you would step in because if somebody doesn't have the proper knowledge and training, then it falls on GSA. Is that correct?
Yes,
To do.
yes. But what I normally do is I'll talk to the appointing authority, like the director, to say, I think this individual within your department has knowledge, has been trained, knows the procurement, knows the how she has to get three quotes, and the process. So then I would recommend an individual to handle it for them, like for example, the library.
Thank you. Okay, so maybe one last section that topics. So as far as now moving forward with the ARP funding. So last year you handled you processed 68 million, about 68 million of purchase orders according to the budget submittal. And coming up with the ARP funds, there is over 600 million that we're expecting. What do you anticipate as far as emergency and sole source? I mean, that may be a difficult question, but are you hearing from agencies regards to how they're going to use the funds? Is that, and are they preparing documentation so that we can avoid using the emergency and sole source procurements? Have you heard anything to that
No,
effect?
no.
And how much do you project? I mean, if we're trying to do the calculations, 7 million or close to 8 million of last year versus now. Yeah, is there any, it's okay, we can't project right now. So as far as workload, we can't determine how many staff you need, right? So that makes it very difficult. But I know in the budget hearing, you requested a total of eight staff.
Yes.
Um, so I know currently you have how many buyers in your office?
We currently have 4 bio ones.
Oh, okay. All right. And then do you have any personnel from other agencies that are helping you with the workload?
No, none assigned to GSA.
Okay, so you only have the 4 buyers. And
Yes.
okay. And do you anticipate, should the amount of sole source and emergency procurements suddenly increase? Do you anticipate bringing in staff from other agencies to come in and assist?
I'm not gonna focus on whether it's gonna, let's say the forward, the anticipated procurement that will take place. I wouldn't anticipate it to be, the majority would be sole source or emergency at this point. Because
Okay.
again, I look forward to, of course, recommending going through the formal bid solicitation, no matter what it is. Depending on the need, that we would actually revert to the sole source or emergency.
Okay.
Again, depending on the need, is when I can make a determination of whether we would have to avoid going to the competitive process.
All right. And then as far as technology, so in the graph that I showed, a significant portion is technology related. Um, is there somebody that you can consult with to make sure that we're getting the best deal, as far as an investment is concerned? Because I know once you buy, technology or purchase technology, it's a long-term kind of investment. Generally, right? So are there consultants that you list, tap to kind of get the best knowledge? Because, you know, like GPA, for instance, they have a lot of experts when it comes to, you know, very specialized equipment for energy purposes. And I'm just wondering, does GSA have that procedure in place to ensure that the purchases of these long-term investments is the best type of purchase?
Not at this point. We don't have no funding to hire these consultants to oversee, you know, whether we're getting the best buy for our buck. We rely solely on, like, let's say the Office of Technology Manager to advise us if really it's the best buy for our buck. Because I don't have even just to get the buyers, I can't afford. I can't get people in here, let alone get a consultant to do this expert study for me. You know.
Yeah. So Office of Technology, you just mentioned that, right? So perhaps, I mean, maybe my recommendation is to work with them because that's their mandate, is to
Right.
kind of.
But we do work closely with them. I do work closely with Mr. Lujan when it comes to these old tech issues.
Okay. Yeah, more formalizing that process. I mean, that's perhaps one of the SOPs that can be developed in regards to technology, considering that it is a significant portion of the sole source procurement. And then as well as BSP. So Bureau of Statistics and Plans, they are working towards, they're doing studies on the government of Guam's financial management systems. So it's really important to kind of like coordinate those efforts.
I think the assessment being done by BOSP, Senator, is the IT assessment, but I don't think it's primarily for the FMIS. You know
Yes,
what I mean? Yes,
yeah,
yes.
IT assessment, in addition to other things. I think it's a lot of DRT related functions. Okay. So changes in law regulations. Do you see areas that can, you know, perhaps, I mean, are you dealing with more of the operational part of it? Do you have any recommendations? First of all, actually, let's go back. So the monthly monitoring, reporting requirements, the recent law that was passed. So I guess in regards to that, I think it would be very good to send, so we received the purchase order list, and that's more complete. If that could be sent on a monthly basis, that would be much more helpful than what was submitted to Message and Communications. So yeah, this is a much completer list. So that's my recommendation, is to send, yeah, that. And as far as changes, yeah, so as far as the changes in the emergency procurement law, that also would require reaching out to the line agencies to let them know that they have to have a public hearing for any kind of emergency procurement that they want to continue with.
Yes,
and it has to
the circular.
Thank you. Okay, I think this concludes my questions. I do want to open the floor to my colleagues for any questions. So Senator Brown, if you have any questions for Chief Procurement Officer.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairwoman. I did want to ask, because and Madam Chair, I do really appreciate the breakdown that you provided at the beginning of the hearing. I think that's probably something we should require GSA to provide to essentially, and I don't know if they do, I've never seen a presentation like that provides this type of breakdown. And perhaps, I know now the law has been passed, at least we passed through the legislature, requiring the monthly reporting of these type of procurements, so that we're not looking a year later at what is an extensive list. I mean, certainly we should have some sense of comfort, of course, that a majority of these things were maybe tied to or related to the pandemic, but there's certainly some things that I look on the list that I would like to inquire, because some of these services obviously can be provided by other companies. And as we've gotten inquiries from them, you know, I wanted to ask Ms. Afaji, how do they address that? Like some of the general generic things like cleaning supplies or cleaning services. How do they go about determining for emergency procurement? Because I see some companies over several months that it's that one company that was selected, and these to me are looked at as kind of generic type of services. So how did they make that determination to select any particular company, where there's a number of companies in Guam that provide that? How is that determination made?
Well, good morning, Senator Brown.
Morning.
Yeah, normally we actually have the vendor list and we send out, although the statute under emergency requires at least three, we actually do best business practices. So as much companies as we know, especially it's under, it's an emergency, we issue out to companies that we are aware that provides these kind of services. So again, there's a lot of reasons why companies don't participate. It's either it's just they don't want to deal with the government, but we have made some calls to find out why they don't want to participate with the government, and I make sure that the buyers note that in the abstract. That's a standing rule here. But again, companies, especially during the pandemic, if they are interested in doing business with the government, all they have to do was write to us and let us know that they are out there. But we do solicit, we do meet the requirement of the law.
Does GSA publish anything on a regular basis for certain services that I mean, like this? These are kind of generic things. Do you publish rather than the vendor having to come to you? Because you don't know. I mean, a company could have been created, a month ago that we don't know about that may be able to provide these services that are not aware of how to engage with the government. Do you provide an ongoing list or publish it so that everyone has a way of knowing that the government may be interested in procuring these type of services? Because I mean, cleaning supplies, of course, I'm sure there can be a better science to it depending on, if I'm doing sanitizing at the hospital versus my office space, there might be some slight differences there. But how do we do that to expand the net so that any potential company that can provide that service has an opportunity to get on the list? How are they informed rather than just having a buyer randomly call because we think this company may provide this service? Is there a way that we publish something so that companies know that if they provide this kind of service, they can get on that list rather than waiting to be contacted because your buyers think they may provide a service? Because there's some companies that are traditionally known for only certain type of services that they provide that may have expanded as a result of the pandemic. To have that avenue of bringing in things that in volume that we might not have previously needed, obviously, prior to the pandemic. But how do we do it so it's a fair playing field so that there is that awareness out there in the business community as well about where those potential needs might be for the government?
Yes, Senator. In fact, I'm glad you asked that question. We do publish, even for the sole source, we do publish annually. These equipments, or for example, these services, we do publish out a list of potential sole source method processes that we normally, for example, DMR, we still put those out on a newspaper ad, and we invite, just like you said, there may be a company that was just started 2 months ago, and we're not aware. So we do put out an advertisement to notice to all vendors, we're requesting for any interested companies or vendors interested or is able to provide these type of services, please provide your show of interest to GSA. So we do put out an ad for sole source.
How often do you provide that? I mean, is it once a year? How is it as the need is there? How does that happen?
No, once a year before the fiscal year, where we're going to again renew these purchase orders or issue out purchase orders for the annual maintenance of an equipment that no longer has warranty on it, for example, and they're claiming to be proprietary, but we will never know. Again, I always ask the departments to weigh out maintenance with this, existing company versus buying a new equipment or a new printer or, just a new equipment to provide the same service. Are we weighing out how do we do we even conduct an analysis to know that maybe procuring a new equipment is cheaper than to keep paying on this maintenance program for an existing equipment? So,
can we be provided copies of these advertisements for the last, say, 3 years, just so we can see them? I'd like to see to see what these advertisements include and what they say, just because I just want to ensure, because there's too much cloud and rumor and innuendo going around because of some of these companies and their connections to certain people in certain places. that only their companies are getting the ads, especially when the service that's being provided is not a real specialty service. I mean, perhaps it can be argued that, these IT services that encompass some of the highest amounts here of expenditure in the government. Maybe someone can argue that, oh, these are real specialty expertise that, only these companies provide. But some of these other things, I mean, heck, I could probably get a cleaning contract. But I want to ensure that there's no question with regards to how procurement is being done, that's not being given to favored vendors. And I think every step that GSA can take to show and demonstrate as well in their records that, every effort's being made to get that information out there so that everyone has an equal opportunity to apply. Because on the surface, it's going to appear that there's a special connection here. And that's why it's important, I think, to show that net has been broadened out there so that anyone and everyone who has the ability and has the interest, because of course, there's some companies that won't work with what they look at as a bureaucracy in the government of Guam, or favored biases in the government, don't want to engage with the government of Guam in providing services. They're also concerned as to whether or not they're going to get paid for those services. So I think just to shed light on this issue, to minimize the possibility of corruption because of these type of affiliations that we know do exist, that can be clearly demonstrated. So we don't have any favored vendors out there. Because the speculation is there, the talk is there, the rumors there, the innuendos there, but it's making sure that that's not the case, because this is public money and we don't want to see it going into the pockets of our favored family and friends. That should not be the objective. So certainly every step that can be taken to do that is very important. One of the other things on the list I wanted to inquire for this emergency included the procurement of vehicles. Why was there a need for the procurement of vehicles? I mean, one's, 2 utility vehicles, and one vendor got, if I'm reading it correct, it's over several $100,000 worth of vehicles. What were those procurements for?
The need on that one there, I believe, for contract tracing, Senator.
Mm-hmm.
When account had to go out and do some contract tracing, contact tracing.
So all of a sudden, with all the vehicles we have in the government of Guam, we had to procure brand new vehicles on emergency procurement to go out and do contract tracing. Seriously?
But I guess every department.
That was a justification?
Oh.
Really? Of course, maybe you can't say you're not the one deciding what's to be procured, but I mean, that's the kind of stuff that really, with all the equipment in government of Guam, all the vehicles in government of Guam during a pandemic, we've got to go spend several $100,000 to buy vehicles to do contract tracing. That was a justification.
Just so you know, Senator, there was a pool, again, through all the agencies of having to turn in some of your vehicles to assist this contact tracing. So that effort was made. And I know
everyone might have a different style of management, but it's just that kind of stuff that you got to wonder, especially, if this was a regular procurement and it was out there for bid, even that, we know it has the challenges for, just even as and you're more experienced in this, just regular bids. But when you're doing this type of, these amounts for that purpose, under emergency procurement, especially when we do have such extensive fleets of vehicles, particularly we had a number of GovCom agencies that weren't even operating during this pandemic. It just begs to question these issues when you have that type of money being used to procure under emergency procurement. If it's a regular procurement, then there's a need for that in the agency. Maybe that's something less that we could question. But emergency procurement, this is just, if that's the reason. I think most people are going to ask, gosh, all the vehicles in the government of Guam that could have been, put towards this effort to go out and buy that. And again, because you got to question that, because we do have a number of other companies on Guam that do provide vehicles, and it's wanting to make sure, again, is that equal opportunity, because emergency procurement should be the exception to the rule here.
So if I can interject, we did solicit to all these companies that sells vehicles. Just for your information, we didn't leave anybody out. Triple J, Cars Plus, we sent out quotes to all these automotive company, the vehicles. So we didn't leave anybody out locally. Just so you know.
Oh, it's not just for me to know, Ms. Claudia, it's for the public to know, to make sure, because again, we understand, but things under emergency procurement, as you know, we want to see that as the exception to the rule, not the standard. And some of these things, of course, as we look at them, we're wondering, why is this something that needs to be procured as emergency procurement? I mean, but we want to minimize this as much as possible because all of this is the exception to the standard rule of procurement in terms of us being able to go out and do proper bid announcements and go through that process. Because this process doesn't allow for that. You're trying to expedite it, of course, in being able to get these things. And we understand for the pandemic, there's other critical things here that can be viewed as quite legitimate and needed. But other things, again, just, it does raise that question mark. I want to ask another question out of this whole list. Did GSA procure all of these items that are listed here? Are you the sole procurer for the government for everything listed here? Did any other entity in the government of Guam do procurement for the items that are listed here under sole source or emergency procurement?
No, on the
Did all
list
this get processed? Did all this get processed by your office?
yes. On the
Everything.
list, yes.
And is there any other government agency that was doing any procurement? And I'm asking because, let's go back to the hotel issue that happened. I mean, who did that procurement for the hotels when the pandemic started? Did your office do the procurement?
Okay, there's the first set of QFACs and ISO-FAC that was conducted. There's the second and the third. So we did second and third. Okay.
Okay.
So we're clear.
Who did the first procurement? You're saying there's three procurements that happened. Who did the first one?
The first one was handled by the governor's office or Homeland. I think in conjunction with Homeland Security. It was between the Homeland Security and the governor's office, I believe, on the first, because I wasn't involved on the first.
Was that done under the governor's authority for emergency procurement? I can't just go out doing my own procurement without the authority to do it. How was that transacted?
I don't know. Like I said, I have no input on the first set.
But wouldn't you control government procurement unless it's something that is, like autonomous agencies would have their own designation for procurement, right? They would have the authority to. Who else in the government has a designated authority to procure for the government of Guam?
DPW.
Okay, well, DPW construction, yes, but
yes.
But who else has the authority? What government agencies have the authority to go out and execute their own procurement without GSA?
All line agencies and departments can do the request for proposal. They don't have to go through my office to establish a contract under the professional services. So all line agencies and departments have the authority to conduct their own procurement for professional services.
Okay, and do they do that? How do you review that? Do you review it?
No. I don't.
Not for professional services, but how about for anything else? Any other types of commodities or things that are needed? That's for professional services, but what if they need supplies and things of that nature, equipment?
Then
would that come under you? And so what with regards to the procuring of the hotels, would that come under you or no?
It should, but like I said, why it didn't come to us, we weren't aware that was happening.
Does the governor's office has legal authority on their own to go out and procure? Could the governor procure on her own with her own authority?
On procurement?
Yeah, to procure. Go procure a hotel. I mean,
no.
How do you do that?
We actually handle the services for procurement, non-professional services. Like again, formal bids, everything goes through here, emergency.
And so when it doesn't, does that also include Homeland? Would Homeland have to go through you?
Yes.
And so what happens when it doesn't? Did you raise a question about that?
How could I raise it if I didn't know? I
think everybody knew. Paper was everywhere.
To get exposed, that's when we knew. Even the AG's called. Are you aware? We're asking each other. Because maybe they were aware, I wasn't. Right? But of course, we were asking each other if we were aware, we're not aware.
Well, I'm just bringing it up because, we want to clean up this process. There's just a dark cloud that hangs over some of these issues of Guam procurement. And certainly this is the first opportunity I've had to publicly ask you these questions. And, these are just things inquiring minds want to know. Most of us hear about it or because we hear it through the media or read it in the newspaper, hear it on the news. But that's a concern. We just want to make sure things are being done through the proper process. So there's no question that, things are being manipulated or certain favored interests are receiving public money. That's the main concern. So as far as you're concerned, the initial procurement of the hotels for the regarding this whole pandemic was not through GSA.
Correct.
Phase one. So phase two, how did you get that under your operations, which you're saying should have gone through GSA in the first place?
So we received a request from Homeland Security for a quarantine and isolation, and also the medical staff. So then what we did with that was we actually requested from GHRA a list of hotels, that may be that are open. So we got the list. We sent out quotes. The record will show we sent out quotes to as much as we could on the list, and we got feedbacks that they're not interested. Various hotels did submit responses. They did respond to our request, and they provided they're not interested. No quote. And we did get, thank God, we got a few that were willing to open up their hotels to accommodate the ISO and quarantine. But we did send out the request for quotes to as much hotels as we can, on the list.
So with regards to phase one, then did you inquire as to why that never went through GSA? I mean, if I went off on my own and procured and I have no authority to do it, unless the governor has authority under executive order to become our own procurement at the governor's office, I mean, nothing happened. Was it the end of the story? You just took over from phase two on?
Well, I wouldn't want to go back to try to figure out what they did because I don't want to get involved. Any questions, ask it to them. Don't ask me because I'm saying I don't know on the record what happened.
So do we know then, or do you know from your position, are there any other emergency procurements that may have occurred that are not on this list?
Oh no, everything that we conducted, GSA.
Do you know if there are any other emergency procurements that may have occurred that are not on this list?
No.
So you're not aware that any other procurement besides this phase one of the hotel procurement was not part of GSA? That's all you're aware of?
Yeah, that's the only one that I'm aware of.
Well, I just think we need to get that issue clarified and just have it, because again, I mean, I think it's an unfortunate circumstance that we've all had to, and the world had to go through this procurement. But certainly this or the next emergency that comes, we just want to make sure there's a clear-cut process so that we don't get caught in a situation or you get parties involved that either through their unawareness or maybe not clear intentions are doing GovCon procurement if they're not supposed to be doing. Perhaps the governor's office might come back and say, oh, they have the full authority, under the Organic Act or whatever the case may be to do so. But I mean, those kind of things, that's a big, it's a big issue that has been raised as a result of this. The other thing I wanted to ask is this is what you have listed for emergency procurement and sole source, but of course, government of Guam agencies now, I believe the amount was increased. It used to be $5,000 that they could go out and do their own procurement. Now I believe it's been raised to about about $10,000 now that they can go out and do procurement?
Less than 10.
Less than 10.
Yeah.
So is that something that's reviewed? I mean, is there a formal report of each of these department and agencies so that we know? Because the old process, right? I just make sure I go out and make sure that it's $9,999, right? So that I don't have to go through all those additional requirements. I just make sure it's right below the $10,000 threshold. Is that something that is reviewed or kept track of? Because sometimes we've known in the past, I mean, some departments will just add 2 or 3 different purchase orders, and it far exceeds collectively the amount for the same company, but that's how they're able to process it and justify that it's under the $10,000 amount. Is that something GSA reviews? How are we keeping track of that? And are these department and agencies providing formal reports on their procurement? So that's something that can be viewed by you, the public auditor, anyone who has an interest in wanting to look to these issues.
Actually, Senator, I still control the files although the departments I have delegated the departments to conduct procurement less than 10,000, but the record. So we have the what you call the on-base document management system that's automated. So all these requests for quotations, all the responses, everything I view on the automated system before I approve it. So I see which vendors, if I see that they did they went out to get a quote for, let's say an AC unit, and 2 of them says no quote and 1 says quote, but they went to a automotive shop for AC for vehicles. So I'll reject it. And I'm saying, go to these companies that sells AC units for offices, you know, and not for vehicle. So I still I still have the ultimate review and approval. I still do the approval. The directors don't approve purchase orders. Okay.
And are
So
you still doing that? Are you
yes,
doing that for all GovCom
we're
agencies?
only delegated to do the legwork, you know, like get the quotes because I don't have enough people. So if you want to get your acquisitions out, you need to help us. But I still have the ultimate review of all the procurement that these department and agencies are conducting. So I still review them through our automated system.
Well, I think we just want to make sure, because again, I mean, if I can get a contract here for 8,000, another department 9,000, and so on and so forth. I mean, we know, and it's unfortunate that there are those that want to take advantage of the system, but they do. I mean, they'll run circles around you and everybody else.
Senator, we catch up to them. So for example, I do see that. I don't approve it, I'll return it. And I'm saying you exceeded the less than the small purchase requirement, submit together and put out a bid. Prepare your specs, submit it for the formal solicitation. So we do watch those.
Is there anything aside from your review that provides any reporting of this, any formal process to report these type of procurements so that anyone, including ourselves, if we wanted to go and review that, that we can see that listing?
Yes.
Is that something available?
It's within our automated system.
Right, but that's not something I can't get into your automated system, nor can the general public. Is there any other way that that information is made public for review?
When you say the information, the procurement or the procurement record?
Yes.
File, the procurement file?
Well, not necessarily the file, but the listing that can be provided of what's been procured where under that $10,000 threshold.
I can print out reports on it.
Well, I just think there has to be a way, and maybe this is something, Madam Chair, that we could look at with regards to adding to transparency, that there's a vehicle that can be put in place so that people in the general public or interested other businesses, they could be competitors for all I know, would have access to this information so that we don't have to. I mean, I look at it this way: the more light that gets shed on the issue, the more opportunity we have to ensure that we minimize individuals or interests that are trying to take advantage of the government of Guam. I mean, we're one of the bigger companies, so to speak. We're a public company that needs to procure goods and services, and certainly there's an awful lot of public money that is out there to do so. But even at that level, I think we want to make sure that there's transparency in that process, so that it's not just viewed by GSA, but like I said, because these are public procurements of funds, this allows everybody and anybody who may want to access that information, because it is a public record, to have it available. Maybe that's something we can look at so that we can see how we can further facilitate transparency with regards to those issues. With that, Madam Chair, I'll reserve any further questions at this point. Certainly, I know other colleagues have questions that may have of GSA. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator Brown. Yes, and I agree that it'd be great to have more of the circulars if there's anything that was released regarding sole source request for interests and any RFIs regarding anything that has been utilized for sole source and emergency. It'd be good to have that past historical record. All right, so Senator Tadegui, if you have any questions.
Sujusmasi, Madam Chair. Thank you for this hearing and adhering to the letter I sent you. I was hoping it would be more of a oversight hearing, because I feel comfortable when people are sworn in and they have that that little nudge on the side to make sure the whole truth and nothing but the truth. So help you God kind of scenario. But I appreciate this, and most especially appreciate the graphics that you put out. This is a lot of work that your office did. And I commend you for doing this. And again, I agree with Senator Brown. This is something that I think GSA, if you look at this, I asked the senator to download it on the chat to provide this kind of information. It's easy to read, easy to understand, and you can clearly see when there's something that like a red flag going up, especially in, Senator Brown brought this up earlier. My concern too was the vehicles. And on the diagram on the emergency procurement, it said percentage of, maybe I can ask this to the oversight chair, the percentage of total emergency percentage of total? Is it total 7 vehicles or percentage of total? What exactly is that? It's on the last
Yes.
page.
Yeah, so yeah, if I can clarify its percentage of total emergency procurement. So the amount that was spent was 1.6 million for,
Right.
for new vehicles, and that equates to about 7% of the total emergency procurement that was utilized for the year.
So can you tell me then, Claudia, and good afternoon, good morning, Claudia, and I see Attorney Kono's there too as well. Of this amount, how many vehicles is that? Of the 1.6, how many vehicles were purchased during the emergency procurement? How many vehicles total, and what was the total amount? In other words, are you buying cars? I mean, if you talked about using these vehicles during the pandemic to go and visit areas for contract tracing. Were you using huge SUVs, or, were you using something that was like a simple Toyota, Corolla or something?
I don't believe they were big SUVs. They're just cars to, again, conduct the services, which is the contact tracing. Yeah, but not no SUVs.
Okay, so can you tell me how much on the emergency procurement, how much funding did you spend on those vehicles, and how many vehicles were there?
Okay, I can get back to you on that information. I can don't remember every little bit, like how many vehicles altogether, right, is what you want.
Just during the emergency, yeah, just during emergency procurement. And I don't think there anything on sole sourcing on, was any purchases made on the sole sourcing on the vehicles?
No.
Okay, so just on emergency procurement scenario. And you don't have those numbers, Claudia. It's
not right now, but I can get it for you.
Okay, how about an estimate? Because I'm surprised you wouldn't have those numbers in front of you. This is a hearing to discuss all emergency procurements. I mean,
but you don't expect me to know all of it, Senator. I mean, that's being unreal now. I mean, I conduct so many emergency. I'm not just going to stick to every little bit, and remember all. I understand what you're saying. I'm saying I'll provide you the information, but
well, I'm not talking about
get it.
I'm just talking from the time the pandemic started when we.
There's a lot. You can see it on the list. So I will get the information and provide it to you before we, before we end this meeting.
Okay, I appreciate that. Then I thought, sometimes when we ask, we never get the answers. I'm sorry to go back and forth in different areas, but one of the questions I also had was when you talked about training based on what was brought up by the chairperson for new updates on laws. And so my question is, when was the last time you did this for agencies to update them? I know it's something you want to do, but when's the last time you updated agencies on the new laws of procurement or any changes into procurement law?
2019, right before the pandemic, the end part, right when we entered the 2020 fiscal year. It was around
so you did a training for all the agencies? You did a training for all the agencies in 2019?
Yes, the HR, the training and development posted, so they select to attend the trainings.
Okay, and then how many times during like a certain amount of time do you do it? Like every year, every once a year? What is the time frame?
At least once a year.
Okay, once a year. Thank you.
Yeah. And there are times, Senator, where departments will request, if I can conduct training just for the particular department, like for public health. So I try my best to accommodate when I can. Training just for the particular behavioral health. I've conducted trainings when they request, when the department requests, whenever I have the time to conduct it.
Okay, and in the training, well, how many employees do you have right now that do these procurement assessing? I mean, we had a public hearing on DOA, and you were there during that public hearing on the budget. if I'm not mistaken, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but did you say you had 4 individuals that were, I guess you call them buyers?
Correct.
Okay, 4.
Yes.
Those are 4 employees at GSA right now. Okay. And they are, all these 4 individuals have not gone through the modules, all the different procurement. You're trying to train them as you go. I know
Yes.
it's very okay. Are any of these individuals assigned to you from another agency?
No, none of these.
So you have none of your buyers, none of the 4 individuals came from another, either line agency or a autonomous agency is sitting in your office,
No.
and they're all
They're
being
new,
paid at, sorry?
they are new employees of the government.
What
So they weren't
certification?
laterally transferred from another department.
I'm sorry, say that again, Clark. These 4 individuals?
They were not lateral to GSA, lateral transfer, or they were at another agency performing another duty and got promoted here. None of
Oh,
that.
okay. Okay, so they're all just brand new employees that you're trying to get certified, some type of certification while they're doing this job, and no other employees from another agency has been there. In the last year, you haven't had any other employees coming from another agency?
Yes, we have. We have, there are some agencies like, for example, Public Health, who has a lot.
Okay, so you've had some people from Public Health go to GSA to assist you. What about an autonomous agency? Have you had any in the last year come over? In the last year, since 2020 of January, have you had any come over?
No. There's only one that's here right now, which is the procurement manager of the port. So
I thought you had nobody from a line agent. I mean, a agency.
No, but
now
you're
you have
agency. This one there. Now you're being clear. You're saying the autonomous.
Yes, I thought I said that earlier. Sorry. Yeah. Do you have anyone from the autonomous agencies over at GSA?
Right, and that's why I said yes. We have one.
Well, okay, and is she being paid from the port, or is she being paid from you?
From the port.
She's being, so you do have, okay. I'm sorry, so I'll be specific. So you do have individuals assisting GSA. Is she part of the 4 that you talked about?
No.
Okay, so you have 4 individuals working as buyers, and then on an autonomous agency, you have 1 person also assisting.
Yes.
So you have 5 individuals total right now.
Right. If you're talking, see, you're asking GSA's procurement, GSA's personnel, right? This one.
Well, no, you can have people assigned to your office to assist GSA, just like other agencies have other people that have been transferred over to assist them when there's a project, especially during the pandemic. We know you're going through so much, and with the CARES Act money that's coming in, you do need the assistance. My question was very simple. The question is, how many buyers do you have? Do you have any other buyers coming from other agencies or autonomous agencies to assist GSA? I've asked you that question so many times, and then you said, no, only 4. And now I'm coming to find out, oh, you mean autonomous agencies? And I said, yes, autonomous agencies, you have 1. So that's a total of 5 individuals assisting you. Other than that, I'm going to ask you one more time. Is there anyone else besides that 1 individual from Port Authority, from an autonomous agency, assisting you?
No.
Okay, so you have 5 buyers right now, and her salary is being paid by GSA, or is it being paid by the port?
The port.
So the port is assisting her. Okay, so you do have individuals that can come to GSA to assist you.
Yes.
Okay, that was all. And I'm just going down a road of like how difficult it is for you to get all this information to us. That's all. The other question I had was, you have that one that was done, that was assigned to your office. Written determination that was brought up earlier, and you talked about how the process is through. How soon do you require agencies to provide you that written determination? Is there something in the law that said it needs to be provided to GSA by a certain time, or is that provided when all their documents come to you for approval?
So the written determination is provided when they submit their request. In other words, their requisition, the request for such, supplies or services that's needed under the sole source.
Okay, so it is
But they
provided.
don't provide it. Let's say we receive a requisition from the department, and they lack to provide us the justification or their determination. I give them 1 day. The rule is same day or no later than the next working day. If they don't provide you that justification, return it. Because if it's not important to them, and then they're going to call up, like you say, some of the departments calls you up, GSA is taking a long time to procure or process our requisition, but yet the delay is on them. So the instruction here is same day or no later than the next day, you require or you request for the documentation. They don't submit it, you return that requisition back to them until they're ready to submit so that we can move forward to facilitate their needs. Because I will not be the one to hold the bag and like they're calling you, but yet I asked if you can provide me the department that's complaining so I can provide you with accurate responses. I never got an email from you on which departments are complaining. Because half the time it's their delay.
What type of proactive approach do you do when it comes to these agencies to follow through with the correct procurement process and to ensure that whatever they're doing before they even provide you any, well, not even before that, but what are you doing proactively to ensure they're following the laws?
Proactively, we even send out circulars, okay? So that maybe some cannot absorb, when we're communicating. The communication skills may not be, it varies with different people. But so we send out circulars. You submit these 8 required documents when you're submitting a request for bid. Do they listen? Half the time they don't. We're still returning it. But we send it on a circular.
And that comes out once a month?
Once a year. Whenever the fiscal year is coming through, we send out to advise. I mean, Senator, we don't even have enough people here, let alone to keep sending these things out.
And I think, Claudia, I think it's time now to utilize technology and utilize the ability to actually outsource some. You talk about outsourcing, or you're talking about people utilizing like a third party. For instance, Deloitte & Touche that does auditing. Other companies that you can actually, bring in a private company to do some of this research. I mean, look at this diagram that was provided by a senator's office. If you don't have the time to provide this kind of transparency and this easy enough for senators to look at, then maybe you might think of, hiring somebody with a type of accounting or business degree to put something like this together, and quit using the excuse of we don't have enough people. Everybody, all agencies are having all agencies are having a very difficult time. You've been in this office for I don't know how many years, Claudia. You've been doing this for a very long time, and to keep using that excuse and not coming up with something that is utilizing efficiency and technology to assist you. And that's what's really important here, to have that assistance. And if you can't do it with technology, then may I suggest you, hire outsource this to a company that can put all this information down to provide us senators so we can keep an eye on it for transparent, not just us, but the public to see where their tax money is being spent on. But, you've got to quit using that excuse. We don't have enough people. I don't know how many countless times we've been on budget hearings asking you how many people you need. And now you have the ability to bring other people in from other agencies and autonomous agencies where they always seem to have all the money. an autonomous agency, bringing them in where they're paying their salary, but you're utilizing that individual at your office. So you're not paying for that out of your budget. You know, that's nice. I hope they don't need her that much at the port, or he or her at the port as much as you do. But we've got to find a way to be proactive and not have to come into these hearings all the time because we're not getting the information we need. And it's questionable, especially with the vehicles. So it was a simple question. Within 1 year, how many vehicles were purchased under the emergency procurement? You couldn't even come up with that. You know, that's a listing. And how much money was spent on that? So, you know, I appreciate you being here, Claudia, and doing you're saying you're doing your best you can. Well, I appreciate that. And I appreciate the hardworking staff that you have. And I know that some of them actually leave your agency. Your retention rate over at GSA is very high. Many of them leave your office. I don't know why, but it's stressful. So we need to come up with innovative ideas to get that help you need. And technology is one of them. And, you know, asking us for help. But, you know, Madam Chair, I thank you for the opportunity. I thank you, Claudia, for answering some of my questions and look forward to some of these answers.
But Senator, if I may, you know, like you mentioned, outsource. Outsource comes with money. We need money to outsource. You're saying use technology. I believe if anybody here, I've always tried to update or enhance the system of procurement via the technology. But even if you have the most sophisticated technology, you still need that body to enter these information to get you where you want to be with technology today. That's what I lack. I don't have people. So you're saying I've been using that as an excuse that I don't get things out. Maybe reports I don't get out, but you got to give this office credit for the amount of work we push out here with federal dollars and this lack of resources. We were still able to accomplish that. And for you to talk down to us like that, and that we're using that as an excuse, it's not an excuse, it's reality. Okay? I feel so bad that you down us like that, it's been a long-standing excuse. It wasn't even an excuse because we do flush out these requests. What excuse are you talking about? We do process these requisitions. We stay here, literally stay here till midnight to get these federal dollars out, to make sure we don't return it. Okay, even the audits, you look at the audits and see how much the GSA do that we return on the audits, the independent audits. So you need to give us that credit. I believe for you to say that it's a mere excuse and you're tired of it, it's unjustified because we do the best, and you're right. We do the best we can here with the little resources we have to accommodate the needs of this people, the people of this island. And for you to say that to us, it's unacceptable. It's unacceptable. I wasn't using it, and I never use it as an excuse. You're talking about getting the legislature reports. My goal here is to get this mission accomplished and spend this money for the people of the island. Getting you report is the last. My priority is getting this money spent so that the people can be accommodated on this island. For example, the health. The federal dollar should remain, right? Because we're getting that assistance. But for you to say that I'm using it as a mere excuse, and I've been using it as an excuse, is totally wrong because we do process these requisitions. You're talking about getting reports to you. I hardly get requests from the legislature for reports. I'm just surprised that you guys are so alarmed by this report that I submit. I submit these reports on the Sole Source and Emergency for the past few years because it's required by statute. Why are you guys so alarmed today? Of course, you got to realize the pandemic happened, right? And that's why everybody now is up in arms about it. But I've been submitting it to the legislature. Why now is it such a big thing? Was the legislature not watching it? And now it becomes a big issue? Come on, give us credit because the people here work hard. Even when we have one buyer, you tell me how much money was returned because of GSA's failure to process that request out. And for you to speak down at us to say it's a mere excuse and you're tired, I'm not sure where your tiredness is coming from. We are tired of having to talk to senators, talk to different people about resources for this office. and we get none. Thank God we got 3 new buyers, or 4 now, just in this past few months. And we got them during this pandemic. We need to train, we need to get these people on board, and it's not easy. But for you to say that we're using it as a mere excuse, I disagree, totally disagree with you, just so you know for the record.
Thank you, Claudia. I greatly appreciate your fire. I hope you use that energy to move forward in making GSA a better agency. As far as I'm concerned, this is an excuse that has been used for so many years, and it needs to be resolved. We need to resolve it, and you need to come up with innovative ideas to make this happen. So I greatly appreciate the fire that you have in your heart to do this. And I never talk down to any agency. I said, for all the hard work that your people are doing there. It needs to come up with new innovative ideas to get the work out that you need. And we're standing ready and have been and asked you, even during a budget hearing, how many people do you need? How much money do you need?
Provide us the funding to hire resources.
Yes,
that's what you can do to help us.
We provide the funding to hire. You need the brain power to figure out how to get this to work with what the money that you get.
Right.
So I appreciate it. I appreciate it.
Provide us the funding and I'll see to it that we get the resources.
Yep, I appreciate your fire in this, and I hope that you utilize it toward getting this agency the transparency that we're calling for and the additional help that you need. I appreciate it. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Right. Yeah, thank you. I do, I understand the frustrations with procurement, and we're all trying to make things better. I think that's really kind of what the purpose here is. I've been trying to, since the last budget cycle, I've been trying to get you more staffing, because it doesn't seem right that the whole government of Guam, the line agencies rely on, you mentioned one buyer. You were down to one buyer last term, and you're dealing with like the during the heart of the pandemic. So yeah, I think we're all here trying to make things better. I think transparency is also very important, and this is one of the reasons why we're having this hearing, is to see how we can, reduce the expenditures of government through the procurement process. I know it's not an easy job, and we're trying to assist in whatever way. So, I mean, all of us here I think, have that intention. I think that, it's one of those things, it's a multi-pronged approach. And so therefore, all of these things have to be addressed, and we're just peeling back the layers one at a time, right? Sole source, emergency, staffing, SOPs. These are all things it's going to take time to fix. But we need to be, persistent in making these changes. And in addition to doing the procurements that everybody needs. And during the height of the pandemic, everybody was scrambling, right? People were scrambling. It's just basically, trying to, there's different types of, people were just scrambling to get things done, trying to survive. It's a survival mode. But I think now we have the time to kind of look back and see how we can improve things. It did make us stronger, but I think there's definitely changes that need to be made. And, it's really about, creating a level playing field, having more competition so that everybody has a chance, right? Everybody has a chance at procuring something that the government needs, right? I think that's so important. That's the basis, that's the foundation of our procurement laws. And the more we can work towards that, the better off our island is, right? We can get services at a much more better cost. We can support businesses. We support the people that need these services because we're more frugal with how we spend the money. And so I do appreciate everybody's participation today. Hard work. I mean, that's what it takes. It takes hard work. It takes time. And, I do appreciate everybody's time. All right, thank you. Senator Moylan. First of all, I want to recognize Senator Frank Blas. He was here earlier, and I think he's still trying to connect. He has some connectivity issues, but I do want to recognize him. If he does able to get back, we can also invite him to speak. Senator Moylan, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Claudia. Madam Chair, I have no questions. It's been very informative and very interesting, but I have no questions for Claudia, but thank you for putting together the hearing. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator Moylan. Senator Frank Blas Jr., if you're available, if you can, do you have any questions? And if you're connected. Okay. You're having difficulty hearing him. I think he's trying to connect. Okay, so I know we have, there's a couple things that I forgot to ask. So regarding the line items, there was certain agencies where the amount of the PO was less than the amount that was paid. So is that considered unauthorized, or how does that work, Claudia?
Senator, based on your presentation, I can take a look at those where you're saying there was an excess of payment made against the purchase order, where again it exceeded the PO amount. I can go back and there's more than likely an amendment that was made to increase that purchase order, so it would not be an unauthorized. But I can look at those where you have an over expenditure and then provide you with those amendments.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so in the emergency procurements, they were pertain to the COVID response. So quarantine facilities was one, clinical surveillance, non-congregate shelters, meals, housekeeping, case management, fuel. There was outreach, and there was swabbing. So those were all things that had excess of the
Okay.
PO. The other thing, there was a line item under sole source that was miscellaneous entities. There were two items there. What does that pertain to? Which, do you know what that is?
Miscellaneous?
Yeah,
Do you
so
have
let me see if I can pull that
PO number?
up. Let me look for that. Yeah, I can't find it right away, but we can send that to you. If you can take a look and see, maybe it was misclassified. The other were two items. I don't have the original documents.
Okay.
Yeah, we can get you that PO number. Okay,
Okay.
so the other thing is, I think we talked about blanket purchase agreements under 10,000. And the process, if you can just kind of go over the process. I know there was that was mentioned in the emergency procurement. So is there anything else you want to add to that discussion?
No, but I do have the numbers for Senator Tello on the vehicles.
I'm sorry, which one?
On the vehicles, the number of vehicles.
Okay.
She was referring. So we purchased five altogether.
Okay. Yeah, and that includes buses. I remember seeing buses on there on the list.
Yeah,
We counted 7 on our listing.
I can give you a list. I can provide a list to the, at least on her question, the vehicles.
Okay, I appreciate that. One more thing. So in one of the documents that we received from one of the procurements in the procurement record, there is something called the sole source listing. And it seems like every year that comes out. And there's a listing of different organizations, or sorry, vendors that make the listing. A lot of it's like IT related. There are some trainers, I think, or conferences. Conferences are on here. So yeah, if you can explain the process of how this listing is created.
Are you talking about the newspaper ad, Senator?
We can send that to you. It's actually a spreadsheet.
Vendors?
Yeah, it has vendor numbers, vendor name, type of what they provide, and the services.
So we put out an ad. We issue out a newspaper. We put out a newspaper ad and we will provide those lists, those lists that we actually issue out or award via a sole source procurement. So just like earlier, Senator Brown mentioned that, maybe 2 months ago or a few months ago, a new company started that we're not aware of. So on all procurement that we execute we regularly issue out under a sole source. We issue out a newspaper ad and list it. The way you see that listing there, we issue that listing to these vendors so that if they're interested in providing or they're able to provide these type of services, or even parts for the SmartNet system, like for Motorola radios, we include those on the listing. So that's the list that we issue out to the vendors if they should be interested in providing those kind of services.
Okay. Yeah, if that could be included in your SOP. So I know you're going to submit your SOPs to us.
Okay.
If that could
Yes.
be included in how that listing is created. Okay, I think that's all my questions. I know Senator Taitigui, you had one more question.
Yeah, just to follow up, I just wanted to verify the circular that you put out for all these agencies when you were talking about being proactive. Can you tell me, was that every year or every 6 months that you put this circular out?
Every year. Once a year.
Okay, every year, but yeah. Any chance you can do this, by year, every 6 months instead of a year?
We could. I don't see a problem.
Okay. That might be a suggestion, Claudia. And the last one I have, thank you, Madam Chair. Just the last question, we were talking about those employees that were over at from another agency. Other than the one from Port, do you have any other ones, not just in buyers, but anybody else from other agencies, from autonomous agencies or agencies at GSA right now working under you, being paid by their agency?
So other than buyers, we have one from the PUA who's assisting at assisting in the admin and on the at the warehouse, the tender section of GSA.
I'm sorry, Claudia, you said this one person is from where? What agency?
The PUA program.
Oh, the PUA. Okay.
Yes.
Someone from Department of Labor.
Yes.
Okay. And the one that you have, so that's the only one, those two, right? From those agencies? Okay. Are they being trained for anything particular at your agency? Why are they there? Are there any?
Well, actually, again, we request in fact, I was requesting to see if we can get assistance from PUA to help us with procurement. That was my more, that's where I really need the help. But so we got one from PUA because again, there's a staff from the tender that transferred to GRTA, was picked up on a promotion. So it left me with just a supply clerk. So when I got that one PUA individual, I also needed to cover the tender. So I assigned her to the tender.
Okay, and the other one?
No, that's it.
No, the one that you have from the port. Why is that person?
Procurement.
To help you with procurement, right?
Yes.
Okay, thanks. That's it. Thank you, Madam Chair. Appreciate it. Again, appreciate it, Claudia. And Mr. Kono, good to see you too as well.
Great. Thank you, Senator Taitigui. So Director Byrne, did you want to provide any information? I know you have a
yes, thank you, Senator. Information and a kind of overview of some of the things I've heard today, because we obviously want to take note of what senators have said. Generally, right, we were talking about a pandemic and an emergency. This emergency was unprecedented. It's certainly, in my lifetime, I've never lived through anything like this. I was fortunate, not to be around in World War II. I came after that, but this was something totally unprecedented. Were we prepared for it? No. Was anybody prepared for it? No. So there are many things that happened when the pandemic hit the island and a lot of people had to do a lot of very quick activities in a very few days, because if you recall, at that time, all of a sudden we went from like 2 infections to 102 infections in a day. So it's not surprising that there was a lot of matters that had to be subsequently resolved. How do you define an emergency? Are we still in emergency mode? And to a very great deal we are, because things keep on changing. We're very fortunate that the number of infections have decreased, and hospitalization, I think today was 3 or 4, and that's a very good measure of what's going on. But in other countries, infection rates are fairly high, so we've still got to be on alert for whatever actions we have to take in order to counter whatever might happen in the future. I heard a lot about staffing and process, and if I may, I'd like to comment on that. The GSA is a of DOA. DOA, the process was set up so that the acquisition of materials and supplies, and that goes from the identification in the agency that is making the requisition through the formalization of the requisition, the establishment of the encumbrance, the procurement process, the issue of the PO, the receipt of the materials, and the payment of the materials. That involves GSA and accounting in this overall process. And everybody has been faced in all agencies, and particularly in DOA, with this large volume of procurement and payments and payroll issues, because the payroll department here all of a sudden had to deal with a whole lot more overtime, a lot more hazard pay in the early days. So everyone was faced with a lot more, many more transactions, and the dollar volume increased significantly. All in all, we've just been through a single audit. It was published over the weekend, and the question costs were about 1.7 million, and there's all sorts of things in there that have nothing to do with procurement, but there was some procurement issues in there. The previous year was about 1.6 million, but the federal expenditures upon which that was calculated more than doubled. So as a percentage, all these audit issues, as a percentage of the dollar volumes that were spent, plummeted. And I'm very proud of all the people in all these agencies that managed even in these circumstances. And if you recall, Senators, some of these agencies were actually closed for a long time during this period, managed to keep that well under control. As for the staffing of GSA, yes, it did have a high turnover. It's one of the first things I noticed when I got here, and we've managed to staunch that turnover. And as Claudia rightly said, we've got to keep people, we've got to train them, we've got to make sure that they can perform all that needs to be done on their own, and they can explain the process to other people in a way that makes sense, right? Because I think we've absolutely demonstrated here this morning that procurement is one of the stress points in the government, right? And we want to try and remove the stress points and make it as smooth as possible. So we mentioned in the budget that we needed more people. Thank you, Senators, for listening to that. We look forward to getting that funding. We didn't have it last year, but we pointed out that we really need it for last year and this year, but we really need it for fiscal 22, and we appreciate what we heard at the budget hearing. A procurement policy seems to be a difficult issue to deal with. this governor has reestablished the Procurement Policy Office, of which I am the chairman, and we take little bits of this procurement task and look at it. And and I think Senator Perez, you're aware of that because I've discussed that with you at times, and some of the things that the policy office is looking at, and we will continue to look at various particular issues. At the moment, our concentration is going to be on federal purchasing, because a lot of the purchasing that we're going to do is going to come from over the next, certainly over the next 4 years, is going to come from federal dollars. But that's not the only thing the policy office will look at. We will also be looking at some of the limits that we're talking about, and considering whether, because of the high volume that we're talking about, some of these limits need to be raised. Needless to say, we don't want to lose control. But compliance is only one part of this. Getting the process from A to Z is a really important part of this, and especially when we have federal funds which may expire in a short time. I know the ARP funds that finally will be available last for 4 years, but there are many other federal grants and sources, particularly in public health, that terminate much more quickly. So we need to make sure that we get those purchases through if they're purchasing related. So if there's something that you senators feel policy matters that need to be considered, the Procurement Policy Office will be happy to consider and consult with you on that. Comments were also made about I guess it is the body of vendors who wish to do business with the government. I think Senator Brown was talking about that. It's obviously to our advantage to make sure that we have the biggest selection of vendors possible, because that's what keeps prices competitive, but also keeps the economy going if we can support those vendors. And I think in the past, many vendors were reluctant to do business with the government because they were unsure about payments. You can do business with the government, you can go through procurement, you get the contract, but if you don't know when you're going to get paid, that's an uncertainty that it's a business risk that many businesses can't sustain. That's no longer the case. We pay assuming that the contract has been fulfilled or the PO has been properly completed. We pay within 30 days of invoice, and absolutely continuously. If we don't get the invoice here, we even ask the agencies, "Where's your invoice? We want it here so that we can pay it." So vendors no longer should feel that there's a payment risk in dealing with the government. There's another barrier that I think we need to look at, and I think the procurement policy will look at that, is bid bonds. Some companies are capable of getting bonds because, I was in construction for 15 years before, in the period before I came to Guam, and bonds are, especially dealing with governments, bonds were a big part of that issue. And some companies have a hard time getting bonds and don't have the wherewithal to put up cash bonds. So we need to look and see if that regulation is really working, and what's the risk that we're offsetting by having a bond. So we'll take a look at that, and we'll certainly communicate that with you in due course. The other thing that we need to look at is on local funds, because we only get annual budgets, purchase orders have to terminate at the end of the financial year because the funding isn't available for the following year. unless we happen to get the budget in early and we can do something with that purchase order. But that's not true for the federal funds. So we're looking at making sure that federal funds run over from year to year so that we can get a contract and not have to revisit it all the time when federal funds are available. So some of these, these incentives and initiatives, I want you senators to know that we're looking at in order to make this process smoother, more efficient. And you were talking about reporting, and I thank you for that graph, Senator. It was very interesting to see. The current system is very difficult. It's very difficult to get reports out of it. But the new system that we're trying to get down and get under our belt, that kind of report would just come straight out. If you wanted to know what, like Claudia says, there was a type of purchase, you could just press a button and filter the report, and out would come that report instantly. So that's something that I'm confident could come out of a new system. And I think Senator Brown was talking about technology too. That's a good example of the use of technology. We're not stuck. We're trying to move forward. There are difficulties in moving forward, but where we see a barrier, and some of the barriers, Claudia makes some reference to this. Some of the barriers exist in the agencies because they've been doing this over and over again for many years, and change is difficult, but we're trying to make sure that these agencies understand that if you just make a few small adjustments, you can probably deal with the situation in a much more efficient manner. And some of the barriers exist with the vendors who, they've got comfortable basically with the way that we, other than the payment part that I mentioned before, they've got comfortable with the way that we've been carrying on procurement for the last few years. So, they have not much incentive to change unless we move some of these barriers and some of these targets. So everything is up for review. I'm certainly open to any suggestions that senators or anybody else may have to improve the process. But as I say, please remember that it's a total process involving lots of people, both to the left, if you like, and to the right of GSA. And we don't want just to move the bottleneck. Thank you, Senator.
Thank you, Director Byrne, for a good plan of action as far as recommendations. And if I can also add, so if I can highlight the work of Guam Power Authority, looking to them as perhaps modeling some of the practices. I know they start off with a vendors fair in the very beginning to invite those in the community to see what kind of services they provide. So perhaps that could be a regular thing for the government of Guam. In addition to, they do have the SOPs. So when this vendor fair is created, they have SOPs for all the vendors to look at, so they have a clear understanding of what they have to submit for any kind of procurement. So this is something that I've spoken to with the chief as well as other members in the government. So I hope we can follow some of the best practices that we're seeing in other in the autonomous agencies. So in addition to some of these reforms. So yeah, I'm looking forward to working with both you, the chief, as well as Director Byrne, to see how we can streamline our procurement system and make it more facilitate the process. So I want to thank everybody here for their time and all the work that they are doing.
Madam Chair, do you have an opportunity to ask questions to Director Byrne?
Okay, sure, yes, that's that is.
I anticipated that you might.
Especially you, Mr. Byrne. I mean, Is it okay to go ahead, Madam
Oh, yes,
Chair, or?
you recognize.
I'll yield to the lineup. So Senator Brown was before me, so I'll wait my turn. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Senator Brown, do you have any questions for Director Byrne?
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Certainly, thank you, Senator Tiedegree. I not so much a question. I certainly do appreciate his presentation. I mean, I think we share the mutual interest in it. I think we just want to ensure that, and while we do recognize, trust me, we were all there. We've all been here for the pandemic. I don't know anyone in the world who hasn't. So that's not the issue. I think we understand that as a result of that, there's going to be, and there was a need to do the procurement. But moving forward, of course, with future emergencies, I mean, we need to know how to proceed, and we want to make sure that mistakes that were made this time around, that we can minimize that, so we don't raise the question, because there's a lot of money moving through as a result of this, and there unfortunately are parties that will want to take advantage of that, or may have moved to take advantage of these public resources that have been provided to our community. And so certainly for our role, and our role as elected officials by the people, as I see our position as caretakers for a time. And while we're here, I think we have every right to want to inquire on their behalf to make sure that these public funds are properly used and they're not abused, because there are parties out there that will take advantage. And we've seen that time and time again in government, that there have been parties out there who want to take advantage and opportunity, and not a good way, with regards to these public funds. And so certainly I think we should have every reason, every right to inquire of any public official that works in this government that is processing or moving through resources that is being expended with public funds, to ensure that that process is being done properly, and to ensure that there's transparency. We talk a lot about transparency, but the actual execution of that definitely needs a lot of continued improvement in the government. So I certainly appreciate Director Burns's comments. I think we all agree with you, and we certainly understand the challenges. Many of us have run government at Guam department and agencies where procurement and getting the resources we need are critical to execute our respective responsibilities. But again, I mean, there's been this dark cloud that hangs over the procurement process in the government of Guam, and we want to clear that up. We want to make sure there's not abuse. We want to make sure that things are being properly processed. We want to make sure that any interested vendor in our private sector that is a legally recognized company here on Guam and has an interest in providing any of these goods or services of the governor of Guam will have the equal opportunity, and also awareness, that there is an interest in wanting to participate. So as I inquired earlier, Madam Chair, I just want to make sure we follow up on getting copies of those public notices that were provided or printed, so that we can review them. And then also the public, is there something we can enhance that process? Or as was mentioned earlier, perhaps Senator Tiedegree had mentioned maybe we do it every 6 months, or the government requires it's done every 6 months to update, so that interested parties in our private sector can participate, particularly because some of the biggest adverse consequences, Madam Chair, of this pandemic has also fallen, aside from our members of our community that have suffered, and unfortunately those that have passed away, it's the members of the private sector and their employees that have suffered the most, because, we've continued in the government to receive a paycheck. That's the reality. We've continued to receive a paycheck, but many other people have either had reduced work hours, no work hours, or have, as we've seen time and time again, have had to actually close their business, and maybe some never to return to provide service to our community. So I think we need to be mindful of that. I don't think we want to continue to have to question the integrity of the process. And I think that's what we're looking at today. Yes, we're aware that procurement has been ongoing in the government. I think we all understand that, but we also want to make sure that, be it during normal course of events or in this extraordinary situation of this pandemic, we still want to make sure that procurement is being done properly, and that we don't have, because they do exist, let's not kid ourselves. We read about them every day in the paper, hear them on the news. They exist out there that are trying to abuse that process. And that's something that I think we all agree we don't want to see. So with that, Madam Chair, thank you very much. And again, thank you, Director Burns, for providing your points and your insight with regards to this issue.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you, Senator Brown. Senator Tiedegree?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I promise I won't be so hard. I just wanted to put a fire under Claudia's feet right there to get it going, because I know she's very capable of doing her job, very capable. It's just that you hear her voice of frustration, and I'm hoping you hear that, Director Burns, because when it comes down to providing assistance to GSA, especially now with the 600 million coming to Guam, it's definitely needed. I know we're going into this a lot better than we did last year with having 4 individuals now sitting there. Well, technically it's 5 buyers right now. And I'll get into that in my question. Also like to thank you, Director Burns, for your point by point, narrative of the discussions we had. That was very insightful. It's nice to hear someone to have that perspective at the end of every, actually after every public hearing. It's really good to see. But our good chair.
Please, I don't want to be at every public hearing. Thank you.
Well, I know that when we have a public hearing with when Senator Perez does one, she pretty much does that narrative at the end. So it's good, but it's nice to hear your English voice. It adds a little, savoir-faire to it. But
French.
But I do also like to thank you for recognizing the work she put into that graph that was provided. Appreciate that. Just knowingly now that the transfer of individuals from one agency to another, I understand it's a little bit different when it's from line agency to line agency, but when it goes from autonomous agency to line agency, and when people are being transferred from one department to another, and I know it's easier on a line agency, being at the governor's office for 4 years and watching these transfers being made within it. But when you're going to an autonomous agency, and particularly when the funding for that individual who is being paid for and brought into another agency, I mean, that's great for them, but it does take away from the true budget that was set aside for that individual. So my question to you is, how is it a long process to transfer individuals from one agency to another? Like, for instance, the scenario with GSA, where they have someone from Department of Labor on the PUA, and then also, and an example, one from the autonomous agency. So can you kind of explain to us how that works?
Well, I think that the short answer is it doesn't work that well. And it's as you touched on that when you were talking about the pay differentials between the autonomous agencies and the line agencies, which affects GSA, it affects many people in DOA, which makes that kind of transfer difficult, because if we're competing for buyers, for instance, and I think I mentioned it wasn't a buyer, but I think I mentioned in the budget hearing that I was trying to recruit an accountant one, and an autonomous agency was paying an accountant. They were also trying to recruit an accountant one. They were able to pay that accountant one more than I could pay an accountant two. That's very difficult to deal with. But autonomous agencies also have specialized purchasing requirements, right? GPA knows how to buy electrical equipment and assets associated with electrical equipment. But there are things that, they don't know how to buy medical equipment. But GSA got involved in buying medical equipment during this pandemic emergency and had to learn about that too. So GSA has a much broader remit than some of these autonomous agencies. So the port, yes, it buys everything that, it buys cleaning supplies that got mentioned. It buys office supplies and things like that. But it also has to deal with buying a crane, right? And that's not something that GSA has to do. But GSA is often, is, like you mentioned, has to buy buses and cars, right? Which other agencies don't. So yes, there's a transfer of knowledge that can take place, but it's not entirely equivalent.
But there's a difference between a transfer and a difference between somebody being assigned.
Yes.
They're on borrowed, they're being borrowed from one agency. So That's my question.
Right. Well, I will certainly, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. Karen.
No, please, go ahead.
I will certainly talk to other agencies, but just like I mentioned with GSA, the other agencies are having an influx of funds too. Not every, well, yeah, almost every agency. Certainly GWA is. So they too are faced with having to expand their purchasing capabilities. So, and I'm sure they will be reluctant to assign people without having an equivalent person assigned out. So it's something we'll certainly talk to other agencies about. And it's something that I think we should talk to other agencies about, but we're probably all competing for the same asset, but we'll certainly try.
Okay, yeah, it's figuring how you juggle that. It can be very complicated, like you said, but then again, the expertise in certain areas, I understand in medical, but when you talked about the port, and their procurement of, office equipment, things like that, that GSA of course has the expertise in,
right.
But that's why they have a procurement individual at the port to go over those particular cranes, et cetera, like that. So, I'm just surprised that port doesn't need that individual, for procurement, and that you're utilizing this individual. So how can we determine whether that person is assigned there forever or if a person is...
Yeah. That particular person isn't assigned there forever. And I'm sure as soon as the port has the pressing need, that the person will be transferred back to the port. And that's the problem with assignments, right? Is that, like I said, it's very difficult to control the resource without planning it really, really carefully. But certainly we will, thank you for the suggestion, we will look at it.
Okay, I appreciate that. And, any way that we can to other areas that could, multitask, I guess. And that's what we're all doing, multitasking here. So your position, you mentioned earlier, you're the chairman of the Procurement
Policy Office.
Okay, so you oversee that. And that's it for me, but I do appreciate whatever you can do in your agency as well as GSA to bring the confidence back to the public, especially the private sector, into the government at Guam, because we're having difficulty, getting people to even answer these bids based on history of payment to vendors.
Right.
It's a big problem.
Well, thank you, Senator. I did try to address that. We've written to all vendors saying, get your invoices. We've even told them, send them here to DOA rather than have them languish in the agencies. And it's beginning to work.
Okay, that's good to hear. That's good to hear. Well, thank you, Madam Chair, for the opportunity to ask Mr. Byrne some questions and make comments. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Senator Tadegui. Senator Moylan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a short question. It was triggered by Mr. Byrne talking about contracts and contract period and fiscal year versus calendar year. Is GSA reviewing the cleaning of the Parks and Rec bathrooms for an upcoming contract? Because I understand that's not renewed. Is that through GSA or not?
I would have to refer that to Claudia. Perhaps Claudia would respond.
Thank you.
Yes, actually, Senator, we're preparing that bid for the parks, the park attendants.
Park attendant for the bathroom cleaning, right? Yeah, is that an annual contract like Mr. Brum was saying? Is that the situation where we're waiting for the next budget to come in? It seems like the bathroom and the parks has been a regular concern where we miss a gap in contract period. Is that the situation with that?
Actually, the situation with this one here is normally we put out a contract that's a multi-year contract. So it's, for example, 1 year with an option to renew for 3 additional years. The situation, I don't hear that there's a situation right now with parks regarding this. It's just that they're needing to renew their bid, again, redo the bid. It's up with its 3rd year renewal. I mean, it's final year, so they're having to issue out a new solicitation.
If you can talk with the director at Parks. Okay, sorry, if you can maybe want to discuss that with the director at Parks. I had a conversation earlier this week, and they actually have volunteers at Epau Beach coming this Saturday to help clean the bathrooms, to include Parks and Rec personnel to clean the bathrooms, because the contract has ended and they're waiting on the renewal or a new contract to take place. So we're having volunteers. So I was just trying to relate that if that was a situation between fiscal year and calendar year, but it seems like it's not.
It's not. I don't believe
So,
so.
okay, so if you can kind of get together with Parks and Rec director there too. And just one final question, Claudia, on the emergency procurement, I just, speaking of your time and limitations, but having to go through purchases like this, like there was one purchase under emergency procurement that was approved on June 30th, 2020. Paper hand towels, $44. It just seems like I'm sure they could have done this other than emergency procurement. And it's just one more entry that you folks have to go through with your limited of time and staff, that I think the agency should be able to take care of that. Whoever needed a case of paper towels as an emergency sounds a little bit not necessary to go through that process. And definitely below $10,000 that they could have taken care of them with themselves. But, hopefully if we can shorten this emergency procurement list and just focus on what is strictly emergency, that could save everybody's time and question.
Right.
Okay.
So currently, Senator, I'm putting together. I'm doing some analytical work. So again, if again, these PPEs that come around, for example, the gloves, and if to include paper towel, which is under the janitorial. We're right now analyzing the bid. It is already open for janitorial supplies. So that's an indefinite. That bid is good for 15 months out. So, again, when it's needed because of whatever situation there is, we have a contract in place already.
All right.
So it has
Thank
gone through
you.
the process.
Okay. Thank you, Claudia. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator Moylan. Is there anyone else here that has questions? Senator Frank Boss Jr., if you're still available. Still trying to connect. Okay, so I just want to thank everybody, Chief Procurement Officer Claudia Akbaji, Attorney Kono, Director Burns, and my colleagues for being here and participating in this informational hearing. So being that there are no further testimonies or questions, the Committee on Environment, Revenue and Taxation, Labor, Procurement, Statistics, Research and Planning adjourns its informational hearing. The time is now 12:14.